I'm Nikhil Mehta. This is Daniel Rotter, and we are the Baltimore Birdwatchers. Excited to bring you another episode of our podcast here. Um, Orioles finishing August 13 and 15. Kind of a disappointing month for the Orioles in a couple ways. We're going to talk about their injuries and what that means for September a little later on in the podcast. But they dealt with another rash of injuries. They did not, however, lose ground in the AL playoff race, in the race for the AL East crown. They're still in first place, which I think is huge after going 13 and 15 in a month that honestly could have been catastrophic with all of the injuries, all of the struggles offensively. They pitched to a 4.68 ERA, which is not good. It is also exactly what you'd expect from a pitching staff that has just been beleaguered by injuries all year, and that just continued to be the case in August. So it feels like maybe I'm just talking a lot about Baltimore sports teams today, but it just feels like a classic case in Baltimore where it's like that could have been catastrophic. They salvaged as much as they could, but it's got to get better. And it almost feels like we're just in this constant state of avoiding disaster, but not reaching the pinnacle of what we could be. Again, I've been talking about the Ravens all day as well, so that also might factor into it. But I think the Orioles had that kind of a month where it could have been really bad, and I it wasn't. Their record really could have been a lot worse than 13 and 15 in that month.
Well, my mindset is just again, like I've said, baseball is a grind, and this month it didn't look like our June on paper, but we did play a lot of teams that are right in the thick of the playoff race, and I hate to say that because a lot of people might think I'm using it as an excuse for a subpar month, but it's tough down the stretch. I mean, I think a lot of veterans will tell you that the August swoon is real and your body is definitely very worn out. And I know it's the same for everybody, but again, we have a lot of young players who are really trying to find their way in this league. And to see in the month of August, looking back, we had to play a 4-game set in Cleveland on the road. And I know Cleveland struggled in August, but they've been a good team all year, and they have maybe the best bullpen in the entire MLB. We then took on two divisional opponents in Toronto, who we dropped the series at the Rogers Center, and the Rays, who we won the series at the Trop. We have a really great record against the Rays this year so far, as we're recording on Friday the 6th. I know we play them this coming weekend, so hopefully it stands. I think we're 8-2 against them right now. Then we played the kind of surging Nats right before Dylan Cruz got called up, and we split with them, split the season series with the Nats, and the Nats are kind of on the rise, and I think a lot of people have tried to comp them to the 2022 Orioles. I'm not sure if they're quite there. I mean, I don't know. I think they have a decent collection of guys right now, but I don't think they have like necessarily the forward momentum that we did. Like they have James Wood, they have Dylan Cruz, they have Luis Garcia, CJ Abrams, but it feels like a lot of the complementary pieces are still lacking with them. So to split with them, it's not what we wanted, but it's better than losing. Then we took on the Red Sox, who were right in the playoff race. We lost that series to the Mets, which we talked about last time. It was unfortunate, but again, the Mets are right there in this thing. They're right in the playoff race. They have been surging, just like the team we took on for a 4-game set after and split with the Astros. I mean, I think a lot of people already are calling the Astros a favorite in the AL again, and they were under 500 in May. So we're playing lots of tough teams. We went to LA. We dropped the series in LA, who's also, again, of course, a perennial playoff contender. So it's just tough. It never lightens up. And even when it did, we took on the Rocks and we took on the White Sox lately, and we won 4 out of 6, and that's great. But we're playing professional teams every night, and you just can never take a night off, especially with how banged up we are.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about the Orioles June. It was a really tough June. They had an easier July schedule. They had Oakland, the Cubbies, Miami, the Padres, the Jays. Um, you know, Again, all Major League Baseball teams. It's a long season, and I think one of the things we realized in late July and into August is that everyone's kind of bad right now. No one really played a lot of great baseball in August. You talked about all these series. They only won one series in August, two if you count the series at the end going into September against the Rockies. So they won two series, but they also split 3 4-game series. They split the 2-game series with the Nats. Against the Mets, they lost those 2 games by 1 run each. So I think you look at how beat up they have been, and you agree it should be better. It also could be a lot worse. And so before we get into some of the struggles I do want to highlight a couple of players this month with just a couple of brief awards. So first is going to be Batter of the Month, and this one's a little bittersweet. It's Ramon Urias, Daniel. Ramon Urias was probably the best Oriole batter in August. He batted 260 with 19 hits, 5 home runs. I went back to look at his last 15, especially. He has 4 home runs in his last 15 games. He's batting 341 and an 1139 OPS from Ramon Urias. I mean, it hasn't been what I felt like in the past with Arias have been kind of empty calories, even when he does hit well, which is he'll hit a solo home run when we're up 6-1. He's made some really big hits all August. He had a couple of big 3-run home runs, I believe. I forget which series it was. Recently, just impressed by him. It was really bummed to see him go down with a sprained ankle. But it really felt like he was the only guy keeping this offensive float, which is a crazy thing to be saying about Ramon Urias, because I think it was our first podcast that we talked about how frustrating it was to watch him struggle on defense when he's not that great of a hitter. I know you're the kind of guy who just loves to see it. You're not at all like, oh, I was wrong. I think it's more like that's fantastic that I was wrong. But it's also kind of an indictment on the offense when Ramon Urias is your best player.
Absolutely. And I was honestly in awe watching it, like you said, because I was kind of preying on Urias's downfall from the start of the season, and not necessarily because I thought he wasn't a major league player. I feel like I've always thought that he could latch on to another rebuilding type of team, and because he is a steady hitter, he doesn't do anything exceptionally well really at the plate, but he does grind out at bats. He doesn't necessarily chase or strike out at a below average rate. Like he is up there to try and hit a line drive somewhere, and to see him succeed was great. And a lot of the reason why I kind of was trying to get us to get him off the team is just because I wanted to clear space for everyone else, and that's really the whole reason. I thought that he was kind of blocking what we had coming in. I just didn't see what the explanation was for giving him playing time. And, this will be something we return to later over a young guy who has earned, the right to get a chance. The thing that's still surprising with Ramon to me is just how bad the fielding has been. And I usually go back to outs above average just because that's kind of one of the leading metrics right now. I know there's defensive runs saved, but there's a few ways to quantify it. But by outs above average, he is quite literally one of the worst defenders in the MLB right now, which for a guy who won the Gold Glove 2 years ago is shocking to say the least. Sorry. So just to see the bat kind of have a streaky hot month, but the glove is kind of what's holding him back throughout that. It has been odd, especially considering how 21 and 22 went. I was really trying, Nikhil, to find a different hitter to nominate for this award, but I just couldn't. Before the pod, we were both discussing this, and I was surfing through some of the Orioles star players, and it was just nothing special. Tony had, I think, a 740 OPS, but his batting average was sub 200. I think he clubbed 8 home runs, and he was our next highest in OPS for the month among our regulars. Cowser was at like 720. Gunnar was at around 700. It just wasn't a good month for the bats, and I think that's something that was readily apparent to anyone who watched the games.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's a small miracle. They came out of this month 13 and 15 with the offense looking as anemic as it is, and the pitching giving up almost 5 runs a game. I mean, that's just not what you would expect from you look at their team wide stats at the end of the month and then you look at their record. So that is both encouraging and discouraging, right? It's encouraging that they're able to stay in this AL East race. It's discouraging though, because if they don't turn around, they can't rely on, this luck of basically, winning a bunch of close games and losing a bunch of bigger ones and just kind of having things even out at the end of the month with your win-loss record, but statistically you probably should have lost more games than you did. So, one guy I also want to highlight that played that I thought was pretty phenomenal this month, other than one start, is our pitcher of the month, and that's Albert Suarez, or at least that's who I'm going to put up for pitcher of the month. Pulling up his stats right now here, he was ERA of 197, had 6 appearances, all of which went for at least 5 innings, 25 strikeouts, just one, two, three, four, 5 really solid starts. 5 shutouts, 6 2/3 shutout, 6 shutout, 5 2/3 with 2 runs, and 7 with 2 runs. And then he just very clearly did not have it the first game of the month against Cleveland. And that was, he gave up 3 earned runs on an inning and 2/3. He just very clearly did not have his stuff that day. But other than that, he was nails. And I think that is the reason the Orioles won. I'm not sure how many of those games they ultimately won, but he got the credit for the win on 2 of those. And he was just nails. I mean, he was just really good. And this came against the Blue Jays, the Rays, the Red Sox, the Astros, and the Rockies. So those aren't necessarily 5 of the best teams in Major League Baseball, but though, like you were saying at the beginning, those are all 5 professional baseball teams that really should be hitting a guy like Suarez a lot better, and he has just pitched his way through all of these lineups.
And just like we were talking about with Ramon, I love to see Suarez succeed, but he's the type of guy that the peripherals indicate he's not really able to sustain that performance. Like he just doesn't really strike out batters enough. I mean, he's giving up hard hit balls as about an average rate. Um, I just, was pretty shocked to see this. Imagine hearing this in March or April that our August hitter and pitcher of the month is Ramon Arias and Albert Suarez. I just still am having trouble, kind of wrapping my head around it. But hey, nonetheless, it was fun to watch him go out there and do his thing. I'm sure there was some batted ball luck involved with all the success he had, but again, he's a guy who's been really important for us this whole year. He's been throwing meaningful innings, and at the same time, I mean, we'll see how healthy Grayson is when we get to our injuries later. He's a guy who, shoot, he might be pitching for us in the playoffs, maybe even starting a game, which is a little scary. But the way that he's kind of gone out there and be a bulldog, at least mentally, and kind of just appear unfazed, is something that gives me hopefully a little bit of confidence that maybe he can give us a few innings of decent baseball in the playoffs if we need him. As far as my pitcher selection goes, I think Suarez is the obvious answer again. I'd like to try and shout out just a couple of other guys. I want to give Eflin some love just because I know he went on the IL, but he really has been pitching very well ever since he came here. In August, he made 3 starts, and he also made a start on September 1st. He's given up 4 runs, gone at least 6 innings, 4 runs total, gone at least 6 innings in each of those starts, and he's struck out at least a batter per inning in 3 of those 4 starts as well. So it's really just showing like exactly how dominant he can be, and I think that we've made some pretty clear adjustments with him because when he was in Tampa, the strikeout numbers were not quite to the level they've been at here. So I think that we have clearly, identified something in his profile when we traded for him, and the strikeout numbers have been coming immediately. I mean, I think his strikeout numbers while he's been here have got to be at least on par with Burns's because Burns has seen a bit of a dip in his strikeouts, honestly, this year career-wise. So having Eflin around next year and seeing the jump in strikeouts is very encouraging just because strikeouts are the best thing you can do as a pitcher. You're limiting the amount of batted ball events possible, and that's exactly what you want to do to prevent runs. And one more guy, I just wanted to shout out our bullpen. I wanted to give Gregory Soto some love just because everyone was coming for his head after the deadline when, we got him. He blew a couple games wide open, but since we've kind of lowered the leverage that we've been putting him into, he's been nailed. And I think at some point we might have to put him back in some higher leverage spots just because he has looked so good. And I just think the stuff is intriguing. I said this last time. I mean, the strike throwing consistency, not at all there, but the stuff can miss bats. And so I think that if I was managing this team right now, Gregory Soto is definitely working his way back into some more high leverage appearances, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think that is, one of the things that was really nice to see was, the bullpen, all the inconsistency and the injuries playing into that. And, Hyde's got all these new relievers. He's got to figure out what levers to pull. And some guys, it's just getting settled. It's just getting settled in the new team, in the new place. Eflin, I like bringing up the stats. 1.4 ERA, 18 strikeouts and 3 appearances. God, I just need him healthy for the playoffs. I need him healthy for the playoffs. You said something earlier on. I wanted to go back to though. If you asked at the beginning of the season, if you told us in the beginning of the season that our player of the month for August, or batter of the month was Ramon Arias, and our batter of the month for August was Albert Suarez, and that we went 13-15 in August with a 4.68 ERA, you would not expect to end that by saying that the Orioles are in sole possession of first place in the AL East. that is testament to what they've done up to this point in the season. I think I still go back to how big it was for them to come out of June with a winning record. As tough as that schedule was, they played really well in June and gave them the cushion to really. It hasn't just been August. July was not pretty either post All-Star break, and so I think that you can look at it in terms of they're sliding downhill, um, but you could also argue they're sliding downhill the slowest because as great as like Aaron Judge has been for the New York Yankees, woohoo, they have not played well in like 2 months. And so it is the kind of thing that you they have the opportunity. Their fate is still very much in their hands. They don't need some other teams to lose a bunch of games just to make the playoffs or just to win the division. Um, and I think the biggest thing, they need the arms to get healthy. We're going to talk about that later in our September series preview. But they need to get these bats back on track. And I think that's where we can move to now in this conversation. You mentioned Gunnar, Santander, lower OPSs this month. Kowser is not tearing it up. But the guy that worries me the most is Adley Rutschman. And this for two reasons. One, his struggles are weird. His playing time. I know you had mentioned. I want you to bring up the exit velocity and launch angle stats that you brought up when we were before the podcast. Him not playing that much catcher, but even when he's not catching, he's not DHing. There's been speculation about an injury. The other thing is, I felt like Adley is kind of the beating heart of this offense. I feel like he is in many ways the engine. Gunnar is great at maybe kickstarting the offense. Maybe he's the ignition. I don't know how to continue that metaphor, but I feel like Rushman's ability to just get on base consistently. However, behind Gunnar is key because they like batting Gunnar lead off. That's fine. But you need guys to keep things going behind Gunnar and get to Tony and get guys on base. And it just has not been a good month for Adley. He has had a real rough go of it, and I don't really know what the explanation is for that. But I think that's probably to me one of the biggest red flags for this offense moving forward. Is just Adley just does not look. He just doesn't look that comfortable at the plate. That's why people are suspicious that it's an injury between the playing time and just his lack of general comfort in the plate. I think that somebody pinpointed him getting hit in the hand, I think back in June or July. And it could be one of those things that you see in football a lot where they could either end their season, get it fixed, or try and play it out and then get it fixed in the offseason when they have more time to recover. But yeah, Daniel, what do you make of Adley's struggles?
Well, first and foremost, there's a reason why most of the time on the open market, catchers don't get as much as shortstops or outfielders, and it's just because the position is so physically demanding. And I'm sure anyone listening to this, it doesn't you don't need to hear that from me. You can see it during the game. Catchers take a beating every night they're out there, and Adley's now been a major league catcher. He's in his third year, and I'm sure that some of that wear and tear in general on his legs is starting to show up as we progress later into the season. He's now a 26-year-old. So he's entering his proverbial prime, but he does have some usage on those knees. He's got some miles on that engine, right? So what I was talking about with you, I was trying to look at some of his batted ball numbers and just kind of see what I could find. I don't think anyone's come up with the perfect explanation yet. I will say that it kind of just seems like his launch angle and his exit velocity do seem a bit different than it did before. So his launch angle before, really, he's been more of a line drive and ground ball type of hitter much of his career, which was why he was never elite at barrel rate to begin with. And as far as what a barrel is statistically, it's a batted ball event. So not counting the defense at all, that leads to a 500 expected batting average and a 1500 expected slug. So like this ball has a very good chance of being an extra base hit most of the time when it's hit. Likely a lot of home runs too. And he's just seemingly getting under more balls. I saw an increase in his launch angle per game quite a bit, which I think you can kind of see. There's a lot of shallow fly balls and pop ups just watching. And even like I was saying, he's never been that great of a barrels guy. Like he's not really like Gunnar in that way where he hits at a certain exit velocity and gets that specific launch angle a lot. Where it's a ball in the gap or that clears the fence at this perfect launch angle. But Adley has 28 barrels this season. Did you know he only has 5 in the past 2.5 months? Like he's just not hitting the most optimal balls for batted ball events for extra base hits. And I wish I could pinpoint what exactly the reason is why. I haven't dove too deep on like what is his swinging strike rate, what is his out of zone chase rate, that sort of thing. But even despite that, to see 23 barrels in the first 3 months and then 5 since, I mean that screams like something's wrong with him to
Something
me.
seems off, and you're talking about some of these peripherals, right? In lower exit velocity, lower hard hit percentage, which aren't necessarily outliers in his game. But the thing that jumps out to me is he has a 14th percentile bat speed. That is really low for a guy who, like, one of the big parts of his game is being able to hit a lot of different pitches and attack every part of the field. But when your bat speed is that low, you're just not going to be able to approach it that way. And I think, it again, it goes back to the speculation about an injury, right? Is that really what's affecting him? And he's trying to play through something. And, if that's the case, it is a very rock and hard place decision where if the only way to get it fixed is knock him out for the season, do you want to get as much as you can out of him now, and then have him do the surgery in the offseason? Maybe but what's the recovery time of that in 2025? And again, this is the headache caused by injuries. It's not just losing a player. It's all the peripheral effects of, what that does to the rest of your lineup, because they've lost so many guys that Adley might be like, no, I got to play through this because we can't afford to keep losing players. We can't afford to keep losing parts of our lineup. And so I got to find a way to play through this. And, I think, those numbers that you brought up, I think are really emblematic of, taking away, the top end of his game. And it's just, his chase rate is in the 50th, in the 49th percentile now too, which is pretty rough for him. He's normally a much more disciplined hitter, but, his struggles, I think, have prevented his ability to kind of keep the engine of this offense churning, and to be the engine of this offense, because there just feels like there isn't as much cohesiveness in the lineup without him there, where, Gunnar gets on or tries to do something explosive, and then there's just nothing behind him. It's very, very hit or miss behind him. And I mean, one of the big advantages that I think we've talked about in the past of Adley Rutschman is having a guy who can play catcher and hit at such a high rate, when a lot of teams have to use mainly defensive players as their catchers, because it's just, rare that they don't have that advantage right now. And that's a big part of their advantage, their ability to field a really competitive lineup, is that they can have O'Hearn, Mountcastle, Santander DHing consistently, and they don't have to add the DHing to keep him from being catcher. But like I said earlier, a lot of times when he's not catching, he's not even DHing. So again, they're very tight-lipped about it. I have this weird feeling that it's some kind of physical thing that's hampering him, whether it's, an injury or, something that's been nagging at him for a while. And the tough part is, if, it's hard for that to get better if he keeps playing as much as they need him to play. So, yeah, moving on from Adley, I want to talk
I
about
just wanted
Kobe
to build
Manning.
up one
Oh,
more
go
thing
ahead.
before you move on. I just wanted, because you mentioned his bat speed was low, and that's a pretty new statistic. I think Statcast just released bat speed this year as a metric for us to look at as fans. I'm sure it was available to organizations a bit before that. But there does seem to be kind of a strong correlation between bat speed and like being an extra base to home run, type of hitter. And it makes sense in pure, like it makes sense just the process, right? Like if you are getting your hands in the barrel to the ball quicker, then naturally it's going to come off the bat with a higher exit velocity. If you're hitting it with a higher exit velocity, there's probably a higher expected batting average, that the batted ball is going to come with. So to see Adley's bat speed is only in the 14th percentile is definitely a bit concerning. And bat speed isn't everything as far as being a good hitter, because Luis Ariz has, I think, one of the lowest bat speeds in the MLB, and he's still one of the best at squaring balls up. I think he's at the top of the MLB in squared up percentage right now. So it's not saying that Adley can't be a good hitter with a lower bat speed. I think it really just means he can't be like an MVP candidate type of power hitter with a low bat speed either, though, because I mean, you just need to be able to get those high exit velocities to sustain a high slugging percentage and to, be an 850 plus OPS hitter. It's just going to be difficult for him to find a way to be that good if he doesn't figure out, either what's wrong with him or what he needs to adjust in his swing to at least maybe get his bat speed back up to like a league average number where he's giving himself a fighting chance to be, an all-star starter in future years. Because I don't know how he was this year if his bat speed was this low all year. He got lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, to me, it's not like his game is not bat speed. Like you were saying, it's never been his game, but I think it's emblematic of something else being wrong is when his bat speed is that low, because it just takes away from his ability to hit every pitch. And then that is, to me, that's the part of his game that is missing, is his ability to be a threat throughout at bats. And he's just not doing that right now. So moving on, I want to talk about the next guy I want to talk about is Kobe Mayo. Mayo came up, struggled like everyone else has, and then came back up when the rosters expanded. He's gonna get playing time with these injuries. With Mountcastle and Arias both out, he's gonna get playing time. And I think that is just gonna be baptism by fire, because the numbers were really not good when he was up. The numbers were really not good when he was up. And we're going to talk about Jackson Holliday in a second here. When all of the vet bats are struggling, you really need one of these young guys to come in and just be able to be a spark. And we just haven't had that from Mayo. Haven't had that from Holliday this month. And it's, I don't know, the offense has just been really rough.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said about Mayo, getting a lot of playing time down the stretch, I'm not sure that that's even the case. I think that from the top down in our organization, maybe they didn't intend to have Mayo be a part of this team's really everyday lineup this year. Just because I've been looking at how much Emmanuel Rivera has been playing, despite the injuries to Westberg and Mountcastle, and I know that now Ramon is on the shelf too. But it's not like Mayo's been penciled into the lineup every day. Again, this is today, Friday, September 6th. We're facing Shane Baz, who is, he's got good stuff. He's a good righty for the Rays. Kobe Mayo's taking a seat on the bench for Nick Mehta today, who has been in AAA all year, probably hitting behind him in the lineup, or has been a much less successful hitter for Norfolk. And, a move like that makes me think, if we really wanted to make Mayo an everyday player, he's got to be out there facing guys like Shane Baz. We're kind of doing the opposite with him, what we're doing with Holliday, I feel like. And I know we haven't quite gotten to Holliday yet, but it's like we're just being so careful with him and picking his spots, so detail oriented like that. It just feels like we don't want to play him. I think at least that's my opinion so far.
Yeah, it's, I think they've had this approach, and it's dating back to even Adley. I think Adley's debut was the first big debut, and then from then on, one thing that this team has consistently done is they just kind of refuse to have two prospects in the lineup at the same time. Like Kerstad, I know the concussion was a whole other thing, but even before the concussion, he just wasn't getting at bats because other guys were getting at bats. You have like Cowser, and when Cowser was getting at bats almost every day, Kerstad almost dropped out of the lineup, and now they have Holliday in the lineup almost every day, and so they don't have Mayo in the lineup as much. What do you do about that? I'm not really sure, other than you just play the kid. You're in a situation where you don't even have that many cards to play. Play the kid. I think that you might as well get these. I don't know. Are you really going to get that much more production from Nick Mehta than you are Kobe Mayo? I don't think so. But are you going to get the valuable development that Kobe Mayo needs to freaking settle in the major leagues like all of these guys have? Yes, that's how he gets it. So I don't think there's anything I don't think there's anything about Mayo that stands out to me like, oh, he's doing this bad, he's doing this bad. I think he has the same issues of every single AAA star that the Orioles have called up in recent years, who comes up and just runs into major league pitching. It is a whole nother level of pitching, and they are just much better at attacking him and his weaknesses. But he's not going to get better if he just doesn't see more pitches, see more at bats. And I think you have the opportunity. It's not a good thing with the injuries, but you have the opportunity to say, you know what, let him loose, go figure it out. Because based on everything I've seen from other players, based on everything I've heard from, analysis of the Orioles, that is how these players figure it out. Is they just go and get at bats. They just have to see more and more pitching. Um, is it ideal to be doing this in September in the middle of a playoff race? No, but again, I just don't think you're getting that much more out of Nick Maton or insert quadruple A player here as opposed to Mayo in the lineup, especially when I go back to this, your guys that you really want in the lineup are out anyway. So you might as well go with the higher upside guy that you need to develop. But that's about all I have on Mayo.
My issue is I don't think we trust him on defense. I think that's why he's not playing. And I think Mike Elias has shown a clear favoritism towards prospects that are good defenders, which is why Holiday and Cowser got first bites over Kerstad and Mayo. I mean, we're playing Emmanuel Rivera and Nick Maton over him, and they've both played in the infield in the major leagues before on other teams. And I mean, I can't lie. He does look a little bit uncomfortable out there. I know he's been playing third base for Norfolk all year. I know he's come up playing third base, but he's got a big frame. I don't know if he necessarily moves like he moves more like a first baseman than like a shortstop. I already kind of see at third base. Just kind of by watching the games, he doesn't look like he can really stick it at third base. He might be passable, and we might be playing him there for the next few years because he can be passable, but I just don't really think third base is his long-term home. And I think that our organization kind of already recognizes that. And we're just really skeptical to give him playing time in the infield in the heat of a playoff race. I think front offices value defense a lot more than fans do. Like fans look at, offensively, like fantasy baseball type of numbers, what kind of production guys are putting up. And that's the reason that they should be in the lineup. But I think front offices, they want to have a strong defense that can make plays and consistently get outs for their pitchers, especially a pitching staff as banged up as ours. They just want someone that they can put in there at third base and say, hey, we feel pretty confident this guy's not going to make an error today. And I guess they don't feel that way about Kobe Mayo is what I think.
Yeah, and the fielding has kind of been an issue on and off all year where it just doesn't it's just not that sharp. They'll make some highlight plays, but they'll miss some boneheaded ones. I guess I just keep going back to how much does defense really matter in the grand scheme of things, and really critically looking at where this team is headed. Um, Mayo's gonna have to learn to play infield. Like he's gonna have to play a position. And again, I think just you have all these injuries. If this was talking about giving O'Hearn Mountcastle or giving Mayo at bats that were taken from O'Hearn or Mountcastle, it's a whole different story. But these are Nick Maton, Emmanuel Rivera at bats that I just don't know what they do for this team in the bigger picture. And I don't know how much they do to win games in the smaller picture. I think that's what I ultimately come down to. But I agree. I agree with what you're saying, though, about their perspective and how the Orioles are feeling about it. I'm just not convinced that it's the right path when you've had all these injuries and you actually have the opportunity to do a lot with a guy who just needs the playing time, just needs the at bats. The last guy I want to talk about is Jackson Holiday, the Golden Tee man himself. There was a lot of excitement when he came back up. He looked pretty solid and then has really cooled off. I think I had his stats up here. He has a sub 500 OPS in his last 15 games. He has just eight hits, 4 walks to 19 strikeouts, batting 157. This is what I was saying with Mayo just earlier. I don't know how you get a prospect better acclimated to the major leagues. I'll admit that. I know it's tough. I know that is a huge jump. But the idea of Jackson's coming up, going back down, and coming up again was that we wouldn't see this again, was that we'd hopefully see a more mature hitter, someone who looks and feels just more ready for the competition that he's facing. And it just hasn't felt that way. I mean, there's still a lot, like he's still obviously still got a great swing. He had a couple really big hits. I forget exactly what team we were playing, but he had that huge bases clearing double, that pinch hit.
Against Houston, yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many moments, both from like Holiday, but just the offense in general, where it really felt like they were turning a corner and they just felt like they turned a corner and they ran into another brick wall again. And Holiday's struggles feel emblematic of that because there have been just so many, like he coming off the bench as a pinch hitter in that situation. I was not expecting much from him just because he's struggled when he hasn't played consistently. When he comes in, he delivers. You're like, all right, he came in off the bench. That's a big spot for him, a huge play. They won the game. And then he just goes nowhere over the next couple of weeks. And it's been frustrating. And like I've said, when your veteran guys are struggling and you have all this young talent that you're calling up throughout the year and they can't come up and provide a spark, your whole offense is just going to scuffle indefinitely.
It's hard to be in the majors as a 20-year-old. Not everyone hits the ground running, super perfectly. And I kind of look at the other two Jacksons, the big prospects who got called up this year, and Jackson Merrill really hit the ground running immediately, and he might win NL Rookie of the Year just because from day one he's been playing awesome. But Jackson Chourio from the Brewers has really only found it in the second half or more recently, and he's kind of blossomed into a potential all-star candidate for next year already. He was up there with Holiday in the prospect rankings coming into the season. I think the thing with Holiday is the swing decisions just aren't there right now. Probably he's striking out a 35% clip, which is, I mean, that's not playable really. That is just not giving yourself a chance if you're striking out 35% in the major leagues, especially if you don't have just stupid power, like John Kensey Noel, Michael Tolio raw power. Like if you aren't hitting a ball 480 when you put the barrel on it, you can't strike out at a 35% clip. That's just not going to work. You're not going to be a productive hitter. And he's only down at a 6% walk rate. He was walking, around 15 or more percent of the time all throughout the minors. So it's clearly just been a huge adjustment. And I want to point to this 244 batting average on balls in play as a reason to get me optimistic as to him turning this thing around soon. But I just can't help but think that with this 35% K rate, these balls that he's putting in play are not very often hard hit balls. Like the reason the batting average on balls in play I think is so low is because he's not really putting hard hit balls into play, and they're all playable balls for defenders, and they're making the plays and getting him out. And it just might not happen this year. And I know it's kind of the Orioles comparison might be to compare him to Machado. And Machado came up and he didn't hit for a lot of power, but he did hit for a solid average. How old is he's playing solid defense at second, which is definitely good. I just don't I don't think you can expect much from him this year. He's shown some raw power, the home run, the grand slam. That was a solid distance for a home run for sure. But we just haven't seen him run into those consistently. And I just, I don't think we have anyone better to play. I think he's going to be playing in the playoffs, but I don't think you can expect much. I think you can expect him to be the 8 or 9 hitter.
Yeah, I'm looking at his spray chart, and the majority of his offensive production has come on triples and home runs that he's pulled to right field. Some have gone out in Orioles ballpark, others have just landed, and he's run on bases very fast. Other than that, it's really just him squaring up a ball up the middle. He's not like getting a lot of hits down the first baseline. He's not getting a lot of clean singles into right field. I think his launch angle is a little bit low because a lot of these are ground balls that are just getting through the middle of the field, and a lot of times if he pulls a ground ball, it's going right to the second baseman. So I agree, it's an approach thing. All the talent in the world, but he's 20 and it's major league pitching. And I think you really hit it on the head when you said that earlier. And I don't think it's an indictment of his future or anything like that. It is just the Orioles are in a situation where they needed a guy like Holiday to explode more than he has. And it isn't a knock against him because what he's trying to do is very, very difficult. But they I don't know, between him and Mayo, you just really would have loved to get something out of them this year with them, how ready they looked in the minor leagues. And I don't keep track of all the other teams' prospects as well, really, to say, but it's just the trouble with going from AAA to dominating in AAA to struggling in the majors has just been such a consistent theme for all these top prospects that I'm just wondering what, if anything, there might be to do about it. Whether that is maybe call them up earlier instead of holding them in AAA as long. I know that that's a whole service time manipulation thing, but calling them up earlier, um, giving them more of a run in the majors, giving them a longer list of things to go work on in the minors instead of, just some small tweaks. Because you go back to the minors and you make those tweaks and you're still seeing all the same easy pitching that you hit the crap out of. And so I'm curious to see now that they're in this very contending focused phase. And that's why they have, played so much up and down with these prospects. Kersted's concussion is just really a tough one in and of itself. But even without that, they've played up and down with the rest of these prospects. And because they're trying to field a competitive team every day, it almost feels like next year is really, spring training and they'll break camp with Holiday and Mayo. And that'll just be the year they just kind of let him loose. I guess that to me has to be the approach because if this is your core, the core's got to gel. The core's got to get settled in the major leagues. And I get wanting to win games now and get to the playoff race and try and win a World Series this year. And so I totally understand, not giving Mayo as many at bats and things like that. But to me, this is just a recurring issue that we see with these prospects. And I know it's not unique to the Orioles, but to me, that is the last step of them kind of figuring out, but kind of breaking the minor leagues. Like it's really felt like the Orioles have broken the drafted player development process with how well they've done. And just the last thing to me is figuring out that transition to major leagues and making it have a higher impact. Because I know I don't want to get into a lot of contract talk now, but they're going to need to keep restocking the major leagues with prospects because I don't, Mountcastle, Mullins, O'Hearn, there are a number of guys who they may not, sign once their arbitration years are up, and that's totally fine. I don't want to get into that too much, but in that case, they're going to have to keep restocking from the minor leagues as well. Still free agents and trades and things like that. But the philosophy of this team is very much to stock for the minor leagues. But when they are in a pennant race and their number one prospect comes up, they can't afford to have him be a black hole in the lineup. And so I don't know. I think this would be a really big thing to focus on this offseason, which is how can we help our batters transition better from the minor leagues to the major leagues in these top prospects, these guys that have done everything they can at the AAA level. Honestly, it's too easy for them in a way. Do they need to be called up earlier? Do you sacrifice the service time in the name of getting more development out of them when they are on these renewable and arbitration years? So that's kind of all I have to say about that. I want to move on to a little September series preview. Looking ahead, there are a couple series I wanted to highlight and a couple series Danny wanted to highlight. They're starting a 3-game series against the Rays today before going to Boston. And then they go to New York at the end of the month from the 24th to the 26th. Obviously, I'm highlighting 3 divisional series as the big ones. But you mentioned this, Daniel. The Red Sox are back in it. I think the Rays have fallen behind enough that it's not like, the matchup games, the direct record against them is going to be a huge deal. But the in-division record, the common record, all those things are going to come into play with how tight this AL East race is. And so these next 6 games, the Orioles really need to win both of these series, I think, to feel comfortable going into New York at the end of the month. I know they have a couple series in the middle there that you're going to talk about, but it's tough to say you're going to go in and sweep New York or take 2 or 3 from New York. So you need a cushion to build up a little bit before that. And, they've got the Rays at home and then they go on a road trip and then they got a home stand. And I think that this series against the Rays and the series against the Red Sox, they need to win 4 of these games just to put themselves in a better position for the Yankees later in the month.
Well, and playing divisional opponents too later in the year. I mean, the Red Sox have fallen a bit there. I think 5.5 games back. They both want to play spoiler. I mean, they don't want to see us succeed, as a divisional opponent.
We've done
they
it to
want to
them.
beat us. Yeah, exactly. So I think those series definitely mean something for both of those teams, especially the Red Sox, whose season is practically going to be on the line at the start of next week in Fenway. So definitely going to have to come with our A game there. I just want to look at some of the other series too, because all these teams are right around 500 or better. I mean, the Tigers have been one of the better teams in the league recently in the month of August or since the All-Star break. Obviously, they have pretty much the unanimous Cy Young Award winner this year if he stays healthy, and Tarek Skubal. They have a lot of solid young pieces on the hitting side as well. Riley Green has really made a nice name for himself, and along the infant, Kerry Carpenter, he's been a beast. And I think along the infield, they have a lot of solid young bats too. So I mean, they're not out of it either. They're right around the same spot as the Red Sox. They're a half game ahead of the Red Sox. They're 5 games out of the wild card. So they certainly have a lot to play for too. And they get us 6 times. We still have a home and home with Detroit. So if we, I know Scooble's pitching tonight. So hopefully we don't have to see him in both series. We'll see. But they're going to be tough, and they have some quality young arms as well on the way up. So Tigers will be nothing to nothing to just overlook. The Giants, they're slightly below 500. I think their offense is pretty weak, honestly, and I don't know if that's just a result of playing at one of the hardest hitters parks in the league. There's not a ton of talent. Matt Chapman's had an awesome year. Um, Blake Snell, he's had a pretty good second half after what was a struggle in the first half. The Giants always, they never roll over. I think has been the culture with the Giants. They're just a solid team, and you can't make mistakes. They have a good bullpen too, just like the Twins, who we end the season with, who are currently the last wild card. And if we don't win the division, there might be a good chance that we run it right back with the Twins after one day and play another 3 game series with them. The Twins have a lot of solid left-handed hitters, and we don't really have much quality left-handed pitching to match that. Their starting pitching has been solid too. I mean, they have Pablo Lopez, who was one of the best pitchers in the league last year, and he is still striking batters out at a good rate despite it being a bit of a down year ERA wise. And Bailey Ober has been tremendous in the second half, and their bullpen is good too. Griffin Jackson, Joan Duran are pretty electric at the back end, so it's never easy. It's never easy down the stretch.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that kind of brings me to the last thing I want to talk about, which is just where the Orioles stand injury wise. It's something we've talked about throughout this podcast. Dean Kramer is poised to take the bump tonight. Big, just to have him back, and just not a frontline starter, not a guy that you're like, oh, thank God we have him for the playoffs. But at the same time, you need someone. You need someone to get through this month. With everyone else with Grayson on the DL, and so he's potentially late September. Um, then on the bullpen, Jacob Webb is he's throwing rehab appearances. He should be back fairly soon. And then Danny Colom also in the bullpen is hoping to come back at the end of this year. But to me, I think best case for that is still the playoffs. Looking at the infield, where they're just beat to hell in the infield too, because they've got Ramon Arias ankle sprain on the September 2nd after as well as he'd been playing, which was just such a bummer. Mountcastle sprained his wrist. Westberg is coming back from that hand fracture. He's kind of resumed some light baseball activities. I also think that kind of the optimism. Hopefully he's back by end of September, and they also announced that Jorge Mateo is going to be out for the year with his surgery on his left elbow, his UCL reconstruction, which just had to happen. I don't think there was any way to keep him around for the season. So I don't know. It's like you're glad to have Kramer back. You're kind of trying to be optimistic about Webb and Grayson and Westberg and even Colon, but Mountcastle and Arias, some of these guys, like Arias has got to come back and swing the bat off an ankle sprain. Mountcastle's to come back and swing the bat off a wrist sprain. I mean, even Westberg broke his hand. I think Westberg I have a lot of confidence in to come back strong, but these guys have to come back off of injuries. And I think this is something that isn't talked about enough in baseball, which is you talked about this with Adley earlier. It's just the onslaught of the season. And you get injured and you get out of rhythm, and then you got to come back in and get right back into rhythm. It is not that easy. So there's optimism that you're getting these guys back, but what kind of bumps are you going to have to go through to get everyone back rolling in the bullpen, rolling in the lineup properly? Is the main thing I'm concerned about as we move through September and head to the playoffs. And the thing that worries me is that some of these guys might debut or might come back in the playoffs. They might only come back for the playoffs. They may not make it back by the end of the month. And that means you're going to the playoffs and you're asking these guys to hit the ground running in the playoffs. That's horrifying to me.
Well, what worries me, I think, and you mentioned a lot of names. I think some of the less impactful names I'm less worried about because I think they'll have more time to build up. But I'm worried about Westburg and Grayson, man. I'm worried about Westburg because, like I've said this on other pods, man, broken hands and broken wrists are dangerous. There have been a lot of great hitters who have been having tremendous seasons, who had their seasons entirely neutralized when they broke a hand or a wrist and then came back later. And I don't exactly know like where on the hand or the wrist, Giancarlo Stanton or Trevor Story had those injuries happen compared to Westburg during their great seasons. But it's tough, man. It's hard to come back from that. And as far as Grayson goes, like he's not projected to come back until the end of the month, and just hard for me to believe that he's going to be able to throw 95 or 100 pitches in a playoff start if he's not coming back until the end of the month. And so I think as of right now, you kind of slot him in as the 3 in our playoff rotation, and maybe he's just a 4 or 5 inning guy, and that's better than anything else we have. But I don't think you can expect June, July, Grayson down the stretch because I don't think he's going to be built up.
Yeah, and a name we haven't even mentioned, Corbin Burns, which I don't want to get too into it here. Just a rough August from him. I'm not, I don't know, I'm not a big pull the emergency, ring the alarm guy in the first place. But he has to show up in the playoffs. Like the pressure is so on him to show up in the playoffs now because they need him to win his starts. They need quality, quality starts. They need quality starts plus from him. They need 7 innings and 2 earned, not 6 and 3. And that's like, you talking about Suarez and Grayson. If Grayson's your 3, is Suarez in the rotation, or do you try and pair him with Grayson so that Grayson goes 5 and then Suarez goes 3 after that, or something like that? I think they're going to need to get creative. Is in managing their bullpen, everyone coming back and being at various levels of healthy, and not just having Grayson come back and blow out his arm right away either, because that would be disastrous, and that would be the kind of disaster that we've talked about the Orioles managed to avoid in August with nothing going so horrifically wrong. But to me, this is the concern with players coming back from injury, is that, the risk of re-injury and the risk that they just need time to ramp up and get back to where they were. And we just don't have that time anymore. I hate to end on kind of a downer, because it sounds like we're both just a little worried about this team down the stretch. So I will remind everyone, they are still first in the AL East. And I just think that is impressive. As much as this team has struggled, being first in the AL East, I think says a lot about just how much raw talent there is. And you hope that whether it's this season or in future seasons, this level of adversity pays off somehow, that it helps these players, these young guys, figure out how to get through this really long, brutal onslaught of a season. It's a huge lesson for the guy, not just for the guys like Holiday and Mayo. I think it's a huge lesson for the guys like Gunnar, for the guys like Adley, who, last year was kind of a fairy tale adventure, and the adrenaline and playing as well as they did, it's kind of easy to lose track of just how much of a grind it was. This year, everything has felt tougher, everything has felt harder, and I think they're just feeling that more. This is what it's like, guys. This is what it's like every year. And so I'm hoping that, even though there's certainly downsides to all the injuries and all that stuff, I'm hoping that the adversity helps this team in the long term.
Hey, I've got a reason to be optimistic about tonight. You know what's happening tonight? Dean Kramer pitching on a Friday night. Shabbat Shalom, baby. The Lord's got to have his hand in that one, right?
And I think that's a good place to end it. We hope that Dean can get the job done on the mound tonight. Hopefully we'll get this podcast out over the weekend or early next week. Daniel, thanks so much for joining me. I'm having a blast doing this with you. And thanks to everyone who tuned in.
1,